Thank you so much for the welcome. It's good to be here in Split. I always like it when we give presentations in these big, halls like this theater. They show a culture. They show that people have been here for a long time. Also, of course, the Roman ruins in the city center is a fantastic place to see. I'm showing some ruins here. It's not really, the point isn't really ruins, but it's sort of alluding to a little bit to history. I will be showing a little bit about the CS history. Compared to the Roman ruins, of course, it's nothing. But I'm going to be jumping a little bit further back as well and a little bit ahead. So just follow me along. CSS has been an important part of my life since I proposed it in 1994. Most of you probably weren't even born at the time. We were then working at CERN. CERN is a physics laboratory in Switzerland. It's actually on the border between France and Switzerland. And it has the world's biggest machine. It's a fantastic device, buried underground. And you can see the scale of it here by looking at this picture. This is a man, right? So here's a man standing, normal-sized man standing, and this is the detector around him. And this is buried deep into the ground. And what takes place here is collisions between small particles. And they try to see what happens when these collide at high speed, to see what basis, what they're made from. It's sort of, discovering the purpose of the universe. All fantastic physics stuff, which I don't know anything about. But I know a little bit about computers. And they need a lot of computers to analyze the data coming out of this detector here. And in the computer department at CERN worked this man, Tim Berners-Lee. He invented, in the early 90s, he invented 3 concepts that all of us still use on an everyday basis. He invented the HTML language, he invented the HTTP protocol, and he invented the concept of URLs, the fact that you can do the http://. We can drop that now mostly. Most of us start with www. something, or maybe we even drop the www. The internet, the web has become an integral part of our lives, and using URLs to fetch information is just, one of the parts of our societies. It's something you had to do in order to participate. So Tim has done much good for the web, and when I learned about his inventions, I came running. And one of the first projects that I was part of when I started working with him there was this project where we set up a computer in the corner. So, this is a physics laboratory in the early 90s. Not all students have computers. Laptops were, starting to come out, but most were stationary, and the students didn't have their own office and such. So we set up this computer in the corner. That's a Sun workstation. They're not around anymore so much, but at the time they were very important. They had a big screen, and that's where many of the early software for the web was developed. Tim also used the Next workstation, so these workstation types were important. And then we have all the pipes here. This is fixed physics stuff. I don't know anything what goes through here, but I know about this thing in the corner, and that's running a browser, giving people access to the web for the first time. And that's kind of an eye-opener, you see the web for the first time. These are more pictures of pipes. I have this hypothesis. Tim had to go past these pipes every day on his way to the office. And my hypothesis is this is actually the inspiration for the HTML tags. You know about HTML tags? The H1, H2, H3, right? And then you have the P element and the list. And, yeah, it's a joke. You can laugh. Good, excellent. Okay, so we put up also a little board here where we explained what this is, and this was kind of our marketing campaign for the web. Remember, people didn't know about this. They had no idea what this was. Okay, so we said, World Wide Web, you click, we do the rest. That was the slogan. And was that a good slogan? No, maybe not. I think we can conclude it wasn't the marketing campaign that made the web very successful. It wasn't the slogan. It wasn't the advertising. It was the technical capabilities of the underlying languages and the protocols. And those are still very important today. And my message to you, if I can sum it up already now in 20 words, is you should know those protocols and languages. And especially for CSS, you can use the Bootstrap framework like the previous speaker talked about, or other frameworks. Frameworks come and go. There's plenty of them. But if you want, somebody said, if you want a job for 2 years, learn a framework. If you want a job for life, learn CSS or HTML or JavaScript. You need to know the basic languages here. Maybe not so much to write everything yourself. That's also possible. But to modify it and to do so in an intelligent manner. So I'm going to be challenging you in that. But we're going to look a little bit more first about where this came from. This is a screenshot of one of the early browsers. It's the NCSA Mosaic browser. It was the first popular web browser because it had it was easy to install, it was easy to click. And this is what it looked like, and it was incredibly fantastic. We had these blue, you see the blue text there and underlying there. Those are links, of course, and you can click there. And then you were taken from one computer in one part of the world, maybe to another computer in another part of the world. It was just marvelous, insane. So we were sort of, wow, wow. And then a lot of other people started to come along too, including designers. And they saw this and they said, okay, that looks pretty good, but now I want the link to be red instead of blue. How do I do that? And you couldn't, because the browsers hard-coded these things. All the backgrounds were gray and all the links were blue. And maybe you could change a setting somewhere to change the default font, but that was very hard and you had to do it yourself as a user. So all these people came to the web and they said, okay, HTML is great, but where are the font tags? Where are the layout mechanisms? And there wasn't any. HTML is very simple, and HTML is semantic. It says something about the meaning of the language. It's easy to explain. I can explain it in 15 seconds. This is a start tag. It starts with these with these brackets. H1 stands for heading level 1. You can also have 2 and 3 and 4, of course. And then here's the end tag, which is different because it has a slash in it. I can say that and explain that to any reasonably literate person in 30 seconds. But what it doesn't have those layout capabilities that people asked for. And then some people started to add those things. And some people said, okay, well, we know we should move to PostScript or PDF or something. We can't use this HTML thing. And then some of us said, maybe not. We value HTML because HTML is universal. It can be presented on all sorts of screens. It can be presented, it can scale to a small screen, big screen. It's not tied to any operating system. It's an open standard. It's something that can be universal. So we wanted to continue with HTML. But we wanted to do more beautiful presentations, not just those sort of semi-boring, after the, 3 weeks only looking at gray backgrounds. You kind of, well, maybe we should look for something variety here. And then you go outside the CERN laboratory and you find these fantastically beautiful place. This is the Alps. City of Geneva is there in the middle in front. You have the vineyards. It's, like Split. You can find fantastic imagery along the Dalmatian coast as well. So the world that humans like to live in is very beautiful. Our eyes are very sensitive to this. We see this as a beautiful pictures. We see these cows. They're grazing in the fields. It looks good. Whereas the world of the science, they are more organized. They try to, detect things. They try to sort information through and through. So there's kind of two worlds meeting there in the early days at CERN. It's the orderly scientific world, and then there's the trying to make things beautiful. So my proposal for CSS was kind of let's get these guys together. Because I realize authors designers would want to say something about design. They want to decide colors, typography, fonts, etc. And you can't deny them that. If you deny them that, they will go use something else. They will make an image. They will use a GIF image of the text, right? You know, you could turn into, the web could become a giant fax machine. Remember fax machines, you know, where you took a picture of a document and you sent that picture from one telephone to another, and you couldn't do anything but print it out and read it with the human reader. You couldn't do any machine processing again. You couldn't index the page. So we wanted to continue to use text, but we wanted to style the text. And therefore CSS was created. It was just like CSS created, just like HTML created to be simple. It should be presentational. It should say something about presentation. You should be able to target specific media. So if you have a small screen, you should have this presentation. If you have a big screen, you have another presentation. And it should also be an open standard. That was also very important, of course, that we can make these standards so that everyone can use them. There shouldn't be any fees, anything you had to sign, nothing. It has to be a common foundation, which is open for everyone. Okay, so then we started adding CSS properties, and here, this is where the designers come in and say, what do we need? And the first thing you typically want to set the font size. Okay, so that's easy. You set font size, we make a property called font size, and you can give it a value, sorry, you could give it a value 40 pixels here. And of course, you've all seen CSS code? Yeah? Yes? Is that a yes? Yes, yes. You all written CSS code? Yes, many people have. Okay, good. So you're smart. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this. You know all this already. You can set the font family. You can set the background. It gets a little more tricky to explain when you set colors, right? Because here we're talking RGB, and this is the sort of code. Okay, this means RGB. That you had to learn. It's not intuitive. And you know, FE7, what is that? You had to know a little bit about color theory and such to figure that one out. But you know, it's easy to write still, or even easier to steal or curate, as the previous speaker said. You can borrow this, and that's what people did, of course, in the beginning, and they still do. They take other people's code, which is a good thing. And then you can set the background of an element, and you know, I can tell you, in 1994, this was really, really hot stuff, that you could, or you know, set the background of an element, really cool, you know, and then you could set borders, too. Woohoo! You know? And colors of borders and styles. We spent a lot of time, you know, discussing what the different styles should be. The dotted styles, for example. And then we had these 3D effects, these insets. Again, all of this is done in one line of code. And we just add a few more values on the properties, and then you can let people do more stuff. It works with the one value, but if you want to do more, you just add a little, you know, a little more. So it's quite simple. It's a one-liner, as we say. And you can also do text shadows this way. Text shadow was very popular. This is, you know, Adobe sold a lot of, you know, Photoshop to do text shadows. It wasn't used so much, this feature, because it wasn't implemented in IE4. Microsoft Internet Explorer didn't have this. So therefore, it sort of sat there in the shadow, so to say. But it's a fantastic thing where you can do all sorts of visual effects. Again, of course, I'm using a browser here, so you can see how this can be text selected. There's text behind there. It's not an image. That's really what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to see text in images. And then, you know, this attracts a lot of people to come, a lot of designers, and they say, okay, I want rounded borders, they say. And we have a committee to discuss this, and I'm arguing, rounded borders? Do we really need rounded borders? Isn't that kind of like, you know, 1970s designs? Aren't we sort of kind of done with that? Can we move on, do something else? Well, it turned out that a lot of people wanted to have rounded borders in CSS. And these designs that came out all used them. So that's one area where I had to give in. And I actually now like rounded borders. I've come to peace with them, and I use them. And again, using, you know, writing one line of code, you can change this dramatically. Here I have a radius which is 40% on all sides. And just by adding another value, I have one vertical and one horizontal radius, and I get a very different, you know, presentation. And our eyes, the human perception, is very sensitive to this. it can see that this is a different presentation. Of course, it's all fluff. It's just visual fluff. Google will not index your document in any other way because it has, this or that border radius, I think. I don't know that for a fact, but that seems reasonable that this is mostly a visual thing. But we shouldn't deny our eyes the beauty of wonderful designs either. The scientific environment where the web came from didn't value aesthetics at all. They valued the order of things. With CSS and the technologies that have been built on it, we're able now to do, I think, quite visually stunning presentations and still have the content there in an accessible manner. So after that, we've had CSS3 has come in. We've added much more features like linear gradients, very cool. We've added a new syntax here, which is a little more challenging maybe. Things get more complicated to explain, but also it increases the power of things you can do. And maybe this is an example of what you shouldn't do, but it's there anyway. A large part of the work was also to do testing. And this is an early screenshots of 3 browsers showing the same web page, but rendering it differently. And again, this is the borders, the rounded borders, how are they implemented? And the specification we thought was clear on this, but in some cases we had to go back and tighten it up a little bit because it wasn't clear. And sometimes there was the implementers who didn't really have time to fix all the bugs they had before they had to ship, so they came out with something that didn't look perfect. That was a big part of the fight in the beginning to get CSS going, because it wasn't like 1994 we started it and then it got in quickly. We had early implementations, but they were fairly poor. They started to get better, but some were still left behind with browsers that didn't support them. So the Web Standards Project was founded as a kind of a grassroots movement to help to encourage browsers to do better. I have been working for Opera Software for 18 years. So I was kind of on the inside in one browser. But we were smaller than, the Netscape and the Internet Explorer especially. So I could also be an activist along the way. So one of the things that I proposed was to write one test page called ACID2 to challenge Microsoft. Microsoft had then said, we're going to do a new version of IE. This is in 2000 and 2005, right? Internet Explorer 6 had then 90% of the market share. So 90% of users used IE6. And IE6 had all these bugs that prevented us from using CSS and other standards correctly. And then Bill Gates said, we're going to do a new version of IE. And we said, that's great, Microsoft. We'd love to help you on that. And we're going to write a test page, which, if you pass it, then your browser will be much better. So we're going to help your product development. And this is the web page we developed. ACID2, it looks simple. You can see what it is, smiley face and all that. But behind every pixel, every block here, there's a test. There's some difficult HTML and especially CSS code. So unless you do the things exactly as the specification says, you're going to have a problem. And when the ACID2 came out, we first tested it in IE6. And this is what it looked like. And you can kind of see that it's a face, right? It has the eyes, right? And the nose is gone. The mouth is here, but there's some drooling going on there. And it's very bloody. So it's obviously clear that IE6 didn't follow the standards. Now, I should also say, none of the other browsers did either. They also had problems, including Opera. So we had to, tell our developers to fix bugs too. But it took longer for Microsoft at the time. They were kind of in the ice age. So it took them a year to come out with a new version, IE7. When IE7 came out, we had high hopes, though. Now you've had the acid test. Now it's all going to look right? No, it didn't look quite right. This is what IE7 does. And you can still see the eyes up there, right? And then maybe this is a nose, but the nose has a scroll bar on it. I don't know what you like. I don't see any scroll bars on you. Mouth is still there, but the drooling is maybe even worse going down here. So obviously, they hadn't really paid much attention. And then something incredible happened, because we were nervous now. You know, is this whole thing going to fail? Are they not going to do this at all? And then the incredible thing that happened was that people started standing up in conferences like this. If a Microsoft guy was on stage, some guy in the back would raise his hand and said, "When are you going to do ACID 2?" You know, they put pressure on Microsoft in forum, in discussion fora. They asked, and by the way, when are you going to do ACID 2? So this is not something one man or a little working group could do. This is something that a whole designer community formed around, because they saw that CSS has all these neat features, but we can't use them because the browsers that people use, the 90% of the users will never experience it. So a lot of pressure was put on Microsoft. And at some point, I think they must have had a meeting in there somewhere where they just said, you know, maybe we'll have to deal with this guy. But when IE8 came out a year later, this is what it looked like. It was magical to see this thing on the screen. And I think, you know, they must have changed in there somewhere. They were probably seeing that their market share would slide a little. They decided to do the right thing. And that's been true ever since. So today, the features that we have in CSS can generally be used by everyone. And it's implemented throughout, and the deployment rate is also quite rapid. The browsers get out there quicker now, due to security mostly, but that also has the benefit to help CSS designers. So that's a good thing. Okay, and then the other problem we had was that, you know, we had all these fantastic features for fonts, but we didn't have many fonts. There were the 10 or so Microsoft core fonts. Microsoft plays a very important role here. The fonts thing is actually very good. They donated these high-quality fonts to the web community. They said, here are the fonts, here are the TrueType files. We spent a lot of money developing these, but you're free to use them. You're free to ship them even in Linux and Mac. So all the computers, starting from 1997 or so, have had these fonts and still have them. So you can pretty much rely on this being available. And that's a good thing. But, you know, like that gray background, when you've been using this for a year or so, then it gets a little boring, perhaps. So we wanted to have more fonts than what the computers had. We wanted to have web fonts. So we introduced, in CSS2, we introduced a way to point to a font file somewhere. And we used, of course, the concept of URLs there to point to. Here I'm actually pointing to a style sheet which has pointers to font files. But we have a mechanism for fetching TrueType files or WebM files from the web. Sorry, not WebM, WOOF files from the web. So you can find a lot of font files for free on the web. Here I'm showing the designs of Dieter Steffmann, a German designer. He was very early on. He produced many of these fonts, and they're very beautiful. They're very characteristic. You know, it's probably not something you want to use for, you know, all your work. When you write your next CV, I wouldn't write it in broadcast titling. But maybe you want to use broadcast titling for a birthday invitation or something special. It helps the design quite a bit to use web fonts. And, you know, these days, web fonts have been used for 5 or so years now commonly, so it's changed the face of the web. One of the great things about web fonts too is that it's not just for visual pleasure, it also helps the web spread and become worldwide. This is an email, I'm not sure you can read this, but this is an email from the Wikipedia community where they announced in 2011 that they would start using web fonts to provide fonts in Indic languages. In India, they have all these languages that are not natively supported by all the operating systems. So you can't rely on there being characters for all the various languages that users may use. So therefore, Wikipedia switched to using web fonts so that you would download a font for that language of yours so that you could read Wikipedia in your native language, which of course is a good thing. If there's one project, which really shows the web has been a good thing for humanity, it's the Wikipedia. It's just fantastic. And the fact that you can have it in all these languages is great. Okay, I'm going to jump forward a little bit now. I've been talking about mostly the past. Now I'm going to look a little bit into the future. Well, it's actually not so far. It's actually implemented now. The Viewport width unit in CSS. It's fairly new. It's something I think you should encourage. I should encourage you to try it out. Some people think that this is actually sponsored by Volkswagen. But that's not the case. Let me see if I can find that document that shows that. Okay, here. This is a great demo page. This is all done in HTML and CSS. There's no images here. I checked the source code. There's no images here. So they have done even the blinking lights of these Volkswagens. Yeah, and the windshield wipers, right? Yes. Still, Volkswagen have not sponsored the VW unit. VW stands for Viewport Width, and what it does is that it will allow you to, let me see, it will allow you to scale things according to the width of the window. So what I'm doing here, I've set the size of the font here to be relative to the width of the window. So when I increase the window size, I also increase the font. So there's no JavaScript involved here. There's no computational overhead, really. The browser does all this in a lightweight fashion internally. So that's great for headings, for example, so I can ensure that the heading fits on one line. It's not so reusable because if I change the content of that heading, maybe it does end up on 2 lines still. So you had to kind of target it for specific pieces of text. It's also something I would not use for the body text of a document because you don't really want to scale that. You want to keep the body text readable. So even on a narrow screen, you want to have a certain size there. So it's not something you want to use everywhere, but it's a neat trick to make things more scalable, more dynamic. Okay, another thing that we should be looking at is more dynamic styles. This is also something that actually is available. Transitions and transforms have been around for a while, and they are being used. I think maybe they're considered to be quite advanced and people are hesitant to write it themselves. It's actually quite simple. I'm going to show this very simple example here. This is the Norwegian state symbol. I'm actually going to be breaking Norwegian law here because the law says that the state symbol should always be in the middle, which it is, and always at the top, which it is, and also be upright. And it's not upright for that 1 second that transition took place. And I'm sure you can all read the code here, what goes on here. So this is HTML first. This is an HTML element which points to an SVG image. And the SVG is the state symbol, of course. And then we have 2 lines of CSS code. The first says that the transition on image element, if it happens, it should take 1 second. That's a duration. And what should happen is that whenever you hover over the element, there should be a transformation. You should rotate the element by minus 360 degrees. And that's what happens when we do that. And when we dehover it, so to say, it goes the other way around. And I'm quite sure if I challenge you to look at this code and see how can this be changed if I wanted to go the other way around, I'm quite sure most of you would figure that out within sort of 3.5 seconds of time, right? You would remove the minus sign, yeah? It's quite easy. You know, writing this from scratch, yeah, you would have to look it up. But changing it, very easy. So, borrow the code from somebody, but make sure you understand the code. That's very important. Another feature which is also coming in now is custom properties. Custom properties is a little bit like variables, but not quite variables. They're quite neat in some ways. I'll show you what they can do. So here's a simple HTML page with, where the color red has been used 3 times. It's used on the text, it's used on the border around it, and it's used as a gradient on the background here. So in traditional CSS, before custom properties, you would have to repeat that color 3 times. With custom properties, you can actually set it once, which I'm doing here. I'm setting a property, and I can choose the name of this property myself. It has to have minus minus in front of it, which is a little cryptic, but I think we can handle that. So you set a key color to be something, and then you refer to that with the var function. You refer to that key color in 1 place, 2 places, 3 places. So if I change, I'm going to try to do this live here. If I change that code.rgb to be something else, I just change it in 1 place, and it takes effect in all 3 places because it gets propagated. So that's quite convenient. Another thing that we can do with custom properties is we can also interface with JavaScript more easily. Here's a little bit of code that I've added to the color example. It's only a few lines of JavaScript, but I've made it so that by adding this color picker, which is easy to do, I can, okay, what happened here? Why didn't that work? There I picked a color, and that was sent back into the web page by way of JavaScript. So it changed that same variable, that key color thing. Let me see if I can do the color JS just to show you. So there's a little bit of scripting, 10 lines of scripting that goes on there, but it's quite easy to do. So those are some of the things that are coming into CSS. Some of the simpler things. The more complex things happens, and this is an ongoing discussion about layout models in CSS. What layout model should we base future designs on? And there's been many proposals, and I tried to count the various ways we can do a certain design by writing just a little bit of HTML, and then to place those elements, those 3, you look at the code here again. I'm not going to show you a lot of code after this, but you have 3 div elements inside 1 div element, and then you try to position them so that they end up not underneath each other like they would do normally, but side by side. And I found that there is 6 different ways of doing this, and those are absolute positioning, table layout, flexbox, multi-column layout, grid, and float. And then I published this, and some guy found 1 more, inline blocks. So we have 7 different ways of doing basically the same thing. And that's kind of a warning sign. Maybe we have too many models here. Are we trying to do advanced layout in too many models? How do these models interact with each other? I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think any of these will be able to replace the others. So I don't think there's going to be one winner coming out of this. I think we're going to have to live with having them. But maybe we could extend them, and maybe we can test how they work together to come up with ways of doing good designs. And I've been trying to play around with that a little bit with one of my own websites, where I am trying to. In Norway, I have an apple farm. You know apple? Yeah? This is real apples, not that computer stuff, okay? So we're growing real apple, and we're pressing these apples to juice, and it's fantastic. Apple juice is one of my favorite things. So I'm taking a lot of pictures, and I'm setting up this page to promote the apples, and I'm using grid, and grid is pretty cool. You can make sort of a a squarish layout and split it up into columns and row, a bit like tables layout, but different. And then you can move things around without thinking so much about where in the source it is. And then we try to scale it. And now we're going to see some of the challenges with scaling. And this is a bit like that first headline, that Volkswagen unit thing, where you see that when you scale things, some things are scaled with regards to the width, and some things are not. Then you end up with a lot of white space sometimes. So here we scale the images, but that creates kind of an uneven pattern. And then I looked at some other ways of doing that, and I had to admit multi-column layout is a favorite of mine. And here I've redone the page using multi-column layout. And it's not exactly the same, but it's similar. I've split it up into multiple columns. And that's why I showed you the columns in the beginning here, right? I like multi-columns. You have fantastic columns in Split 2 in the center, of course. They've been standing for 2,000 years, incredible. With the multi-column layout in CSS, you can actually have the browser will compute how many columns there should be. So when I scale the page here, you see that it will jump. Did you see that jump? From here we have 4 columns, down to 3 columns, down to 2 columns. So what happens there is that you set, as a designer, you set the optimal width of a line. You say the optimal width is 20 m, maybe. So if you have room for 2 columns, then you will be given 2 columns. If it's wider and you have room for 3, it will make it 3. So text will jump around a little bit, but it will actually be, as a reading experience, it will actually be pretty good. It will make sure that lines don't get too long. And of course, if you want to show this on a mobile phone, which is very narrow, you go down to one, just one column. And there's no media queries involved in this. This is all happening just as a result of multi-column layout being quite scalable. But maybe this is not the right way to do it. Maybe there are better ways. Maybe there are things that are missing in multi-column layout or in grid or in table layout. And that discussion is happening right now. So I'd like to encourage you, if you'd like to be part of this in the design community, you should start looking into this and take part in these discussions. And go to conferences and blog about it and Twitter about it and see, look at my fancy new design here. This is not something that we're going to solve. Layout is actually very complex, and we're going to have to discuss this for a very, very long time. I'm not going to go through all the code that led me to this, but it's there. I will publish the talks. Oh, yes. Now we're going to move into another really interesting layout realm of layout, which is where layout really started. Paper-based design, books. And I want to challenge you to write the books, because you're all creative people. You all do things, I believe, that is worth communicating to others. And we do that by email and blogs and Twitter and things. But those are kind of, from one day to the next, or maybe 1 hour to the next, and it's forgotten. I think we should also try to make sure that we write something that lasts a little longer. And it's a fantastic learning experience to write a book. I've done it myself. And when I wrote a book about CSS with Bert Bos, we wanted to do this in CSS to show that it's possible to write a book in CSS. And that's, of course, the second thing I would challenge you to do. When you write your book, whether it's a children's book or something you write, your biography, try to use web technologies for this. Write it in HTML so that you can put it on the web, but also make sure that you can format it into a PDF file. This was actually part of the initial CSS proposal, where it said current browsers consider the computer screen to be the primary presentation target, but HTML has the potential of supporting many output media, for example, paper, speech, and braille. And that continues to be the case. HTML can be used in all these media, and we shouldn't just think about the screens. I know screens are very, very fascinating, dynamic, and we can take them with us in our pockets. They're everywhere. It's great, you know, big, small, all over. But we should also, I think, consider paper as a long-term solution. I think paper is going to be with us, and I think we should try to keep paper with us. So this is the book that Bert and I wrote, and the third edition, we decided to see if, you know, can this be done in CSS? After this, others have done the same. Leah has done her book on CSS Secret, also formatted with CSS. So the paper is a little different as a medium, right? First, it's split. You chop it up. That was the Romans who invented that. 2,000 years ago, they started taking these long scrolls, which had been the tradition at the time, and they split it up and bound them together. That made them very much easier to travel with. You can take information with you. But when you split it up into pages, you also need to provide some means of navigation. And the page number is very important for that. It's just a little thing in the corner, typically at the bottom or top, but it's important to show the reader where he or she is in the document. Also at the top there, you see what we call a running header, which here sets the title of the book. And on the right-hand side is the title of the chapter. So these things that are sort of on the side of a page are important, and CSS needed to be amended in order to set this. We needed to create a function called page to get the page number. Also, you have often things on the side here. You have things in the side notes, kind of. You push things over, and you have various notes. You can see that in web pages too, so that's not so different. Writing the code for this is also quite it's also quite easy. You know, you just set, basically you have a size property, you set how big the output should be. In Europe, that would typically be, you know, A4 if you just want to use a standard printer, but books are often smaller, and so you choose another size. Here I'm using inches, and then I set a margin around it. And then here's the function I mentioned to set the page number at the bottom right of the page. So it's fairly simple, fairly intuitive language to do, and you also have software to help you along the way. I'm involved with the Prince, which makes the Prince formatter, which we used for our book, but there's many others as well, so you can easily find ways of taking your content and turning it into a book. And I think it's a good learning experience for, you know, learning where does this document-based civilization, which we're part of, where does it come from? And the first book that was printed for real, I mean, Romans had books too, but they wrote them by hand. The first book that was printed for real was done by Johannes Gutenberg in Germany in the 1460s. And it still ranks as probably the most beautiful book in the history of printing. It's just fantastic. There are about 50 of these surviving. One museum in New York has 3 of them, an incredible collection. You can find them. Wikipedia will tell you where you can find them. If you're in a place that has one, you should go see it, because it's incredibly beautiful. And Gutenberg, he invented he didn't just do the printing. He invented actually the printing press. He invented the ink that's used. He did research on paper. He also used vellum. He invented justification. He did so many of the things that we today we take for granted. I think he would, you know, along with Tim Berners-Lee, this guy is the one who deserves the most credit for taking us where we want to go. And what he did happened 500 years ago. He did his invention 500 years ago, and that invention totally changed Europe. Around Germany, you know, to Venice, I'm sure this area too, printing shops were set up. And the knowledge that spread made it so that we could have things like the Renaissance. The Reformation wouldn't have happened without the printing press. The Industrial Revolution. So in the comparison of which technology has changed the world the most, printing press is high on my list, but the web is probably even higher, because the web will change not just Europe, which is where the printing press, the West, which is what happened with the printing press, but the web will change the whole world. It's called the World Wide Web. And that's why I end my talk, I have 21 seconds left, by asking you, how long will the web last? And my answer to that is 500 years. That's my guess. It's a very convenient guess, because I'm not going to be around, 500 years from now. You can't tell me I'm wrong. But it's also looking back at Gutenberg, that's where he was. He was there 500 years ago. And his invention is still with us. We can still read his Bible if we had one here. It'd be hard to read. It's in Latin, and the font is not really legible. But we would still know how to turn the pages. Of course, the museum would never let you turn the pages unless maybe you have these gloves on, etc. But you still get my point. The concept, the user interface of a book is unchanged for 500 years. And I think the concept of a web page also will be with us for 500 years. I think that the code we write, whether it's HTML or CSS or JavaScript, it's going to be readable by computers 500 years from now. So if you go into a computer store 500 years from now, the concept is totally crazy. What will it look like? We don't know. We don't know. But I do think that those computers will be able to decode the code that you write when you go to work on Monday. So therefore, please make sure that you write the correct code. Please make sure you understand the specs and you learn to use them, and that you create beautiful web pages using CSS. Thank you so much.